The morning they released Karath onto the parade ground, I was standing in the back row between a Dravathi cadet who was 6 feet of armored muscle and a Sethian who'd placed top of her marksmanship cohort 3 years running. Nobody had put me there because they thought I'd do well. They'd put me there because the formation had to be a rectangle, and rectangles need corners. That's more or less where I'd been since I arrived at way station Orith 14. Back corner, last assigned. Third shift on maintenance rotation when the senior cadets didn't feel like crawling under the coolant manifold. I'd qualified for the Frontier Garrison program on the same merit scores as everyone else, but somewhere between the assessment board and the actual posting, someone had looked at my physical index, 71st percentile, which is fine, which is passing, which is not what a garrison commander wants to put in the beast pen, and decided I was best used elsewhere. I fixed conduit runs, I swept the compound, I showed up where I was told. Which is how I ended up in the back row on assessment morning, holding a non-lethal charge rod that I had been issued 20 minutes ago and had never trained with, waiting to watch Kareth tear someone's confidence apart. I want to be clear about what Kareth was. The garrison briefing used the word Vethrak, the way you'd say thunderstorm, technically accurate, technically survivable, but not something you'd choose to be near. 6 limbs, the forward 4 adapted for ground movement, and the rear 2 for grip and kill. Armored in interlocking scale plates the color of old iron, each one overlapping the next with about a centimeter of give, enough flexibility to move at speed, not enough that anything short of an anti-materiel round was getting through. The head was wide and low, carried close to the ground when it ran, amber fire eyes set wide and deep behind a brow ridge like a ship's hull plate. 3 years in garrison service, 4 before that in frontier suppression. Handler Primus Koss had cycled through 12 handlers before this assessment. The last 2 had made it through orientation. The one before that had not. Karath had been with the garrison for 8 months. She had not cleared a handler. The cadets ahead of me had been briefed twice, in the week prior, on what an uncleared Vethrak looked like in motion. The briefings included footage. I know this because I had been in the 3rd shift maintenance bay during both sessions and had missed them, and the Dravathi cadet beside me had described the footage afterward in the kind of detail that people use when they want you to understand that they are not afraid, but also want someone to know what they witnessed. The footage, apparently, had covered the fate of the 11th handler. The Dravathi had stopped describing it partway through. That morning, before the gates opened, Koss addressed the formation. He was a large man, former suppression unit officer, 3 campaign citations, a scar along his jaw he'd gotten in a situation he described only as a miscalculation regarding a Vethrak's reach. He walked the line the way someone walks a line when they already know the outcome of what's coming, and he told us that the assessment was not a handler selection. It was, he said, a psychological endurance test. The beast would be released. The beast would move through the formation. Anyone who broke and ran would be noted. Anyone who flinched significantly would be noted. Anyone who held position and demonstrated baseline composure would receive a satisfactory entry in their record. He did not say, anyone who held position perfectly still would be selected. That was not how it worked. That was not how it had ever worked. The Vethrak chose their own handler, or they chose nobody. And in 8 months, Karath had chosen nobody. And most people in the formation that morning had made peace with the idea that today would be the same. I was thinking about the conduit splice on sublevel 3. I had logged the preliminary work and not the completion, which meant the maintenance record showed an open task from 2 days prior, and if Commander Veleth ran her weekly infrastructure audit before I got back to the terminal, I was going to have to explain an incomplete entry. It was a small thing. It was the kind of small thing that accumulates into a picture of someone who can't be relied on. I was running through what I'd say when the gate opened. Koss walked Kareth out on a release lead, a formality everyone knew, and led her into the open ground at the head of the formation. 40 cadets. Row on row of people who were better than me at almost everything the garrison measured. The Dravathi beside me had scored 94th percentile. The Sethian had a commendation from her last posting. I had a maintenance log with no citations, which is the best thing anyone had said about me since I arrived. Karath came off the lead and stopped. It was not the stop of an animal confused by open space. It was the stop of something that had just registered 40 options and was evaluating them. The amber eyes moved across the front row. One of the cadets, Sethian, first rank, excellent scores, shifted her weight half an inch to her left. Karath's head tracked to her, and held there for 2 seconds. She went very still, smart. Then the beast walked. She moved through the front row like the cadets were furniture, not aggressive, not hunting, just unhurried, and completely indifferent to the charge rods and the armor, and the tension that had turned 40 trained soldiers into 40 statues. The Dravathi beside me took 1 step backward. I noticed because it put him out of the row, which I'd never seen him do voluntarily. Karath passed the 2nd row, the 3rd. I watched her coming the way you watch a weather front move across flat ground. It was going to arrive. The only question was what it did when it got there. She stopped in front of me. I want to tell you I had a plan. I want to say I'd read the Vethrak behavioral assessments and understood that lateral movement reads as prey flight, that a held gaze is neutral, that the trick is to stay still and let the animal complete its evaluation. But the truth is, I stayed still because I was thinking about the conduit log. I was not afraid. I was distracted. Karath sat down. Not slowly, not cautiously. She folded those 6 limbs with a kind of practical efficiency and settled her weight against my left leg. 300 kilograms of iron-plated predator pressing into my thigh like a large, extremely armored dog that has decided the couch belongs to it. The amber eyes looked forward, fixed on the middle distance, calm as a sentry that has found its post. Her tail, wide and flat, and capable of taking a man's legs off at the knee if she chose, lay flat on the ground beside my boot. Behind me, I heard someone exhale very carefully. I looked at the top of Karath's head. The scale plates there were smaller, finer, with gaps where the edges met. Not weak points exactly, but places where the surface was textured differently, like the way a river smooths a stone unevenly. I thought, without really thinking, that the armored brow was probably warm in sunlight because of how the plates sat. I put my hand on it. Karath made a sound I didn't have a word for, low and resonant and not threatening. The nearest analog in my experience was a ship's engine at low idle, a sound that was less heard than felt through the bones of the chest. Handler Primus Kos appeared at the edge of my vision. He walked up beside me and said, "Step away from the animal, cadet." I looked at him. I looked at Karath. I said, "She seems settled." Karath was, in fact, extremely settled. She had lowered her head to a level that put one amber eye roughly even with my knee. The tail had not moved. Kos said, "That is not your determination to make. Step away." I started to. I did. I took half a step to the side, and Karath's head came up, and the sound the beast made then was different. Not the low idle sound, something shorter, compressed, and directional. Every cadet in the formation had attended enough garrison briefings to recognize that register. The Dravathi took another step backward. 3 cadets in the front row quietly placed their charge rods on the ground, which is the universal signal for, "I am not a threat, please do not involve me." Kos reached out and gripped my arm above the elbow and pulled. What happened next took about a second and a half. Karath was off the ground before Kos's grip had completed its pull. Not lunging, she didn't lunge, which I think is what saved him his arm. She rose, turned, and placed herself between me and Kos with a precision that had nothing sloppy or panicked about it. One of the forward limbs came down across his wrist, not a strike, a placement, deliberate and controlled, pinning his grip without breaking it. The amber eyes were 6 inches from his face. Kos went completely still. I have since talked to people who were in the formation that morning, and the detail everyone remembers, more than the speed, more than the proximity of those eyes, is that Karath made no sound at all during those seconds. No snarl, no warning call, just silence, and the weight of that limb across Kos's wrist, and the amber fire watching his face, patient as stone. Kos released my arm. Karath stepped back, settled against my leg again. The tail lay flat. The parade ground was quiet for a long time. Garrison Commander Veleth had been watching from the Penside observation post. I know this because someone told me later. I hadn't seen her there. She was a compact woman, silver-haired, who had commanded Oreth 14 for 11 years, and had, by all accounts, seen most of what a frontier garrison could produce. She walked across the parade ground, unhurried, the way she did everything, to where I was standing, and she stopped, and she looked at Karath, who looked back at her with those amber eyes without moving a single plate, and then she looked at me. She said, "Have you worked with a Vethrak before, Cadet Cell?" I said I hadn't. She said, "Did you do something to encourage this?" I said I had been thinking about a conduit splice. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at Karath, who had not moved except to breathe. Then she looked at Kos, who was standing 6 feet away, cradling his wrist. Not broken, but going to be a significant bruise before nightfall. His citation record and his campaign scar and his 6 years of assessment mornings hadn't counted for much in the last 90 seconds, and the set of his face suggested he was aware of this. Commander Veleth said, "It appears you have an assignment." That was 6 months ago. Karath sleeps across the doorway of my bunk room. This is not sanctioned by garrison protocol, which specifies that Vethrak units are to be kennelled in the pen compound between active duty periods. I have filed the relevant protocol exception 3 times, and it has been approved 3 times, and I suspect this has less to do with my persuasiveness and more to do with the fact that Karath dismantled the pen gate on the first night, and nobody wanted to be the one to reinstall it. The gate is still leaning against the compound wall. I have not been asked to move it. She follows me through the compound on maintenance shifts. This has, I will admit, improved my access to equipment terminals considerably. There is always a free terminal when Karath is sitting behind me. The conduit splice on sub-level 3 was completed in record time. I have not had an incomplete maintenance log entry since. Handler Primus Kos was transferred to administrative assignment at Sector Command 6 weeks after assessment morning. I am told this was a routine rotation. I have no opinion on it. I asked Commander Veleth once, about a month in, what she thought had happened on the parade ground, what Karath had seen or sensed in a man thinking about conduit work that made her walk past 40 trained and armored candidates and stop. Veleth was quiet for a moment. Then she said that in her experience, Vethrak don't select handlers, they select pack. I thought about that for a while. I thought about the 40 people who had held their charge rods and their composure and done everything right. I thought about the ones who'd set their rods down, which had also been the right call. I thought about the Dravathi, who had the physical scores and the combat record and the genuine nerve to take 1 step back and not a single step more. None of it had been wrong. It had just been the wrong frequency. And then I stopped thinking about it, because Karath was waiting at the end of the corridor, with her head low, and her amber eyes forward, and her tail flat, and the sub-level 3 manifold wasn't going to check itself. I put my hand on the warm space between the iron plates. We went to work.